To continue talking about growth processes in the skeleton, we're going to look at those processes associated with postnatal growth. We are still considering the growth processes of bone. The two that we're going to think about now have to do with, one, how bones get longer from childhood through adolescence, and also how bones change in their shape over the course of the entire bone's life. Long bones get longer at a region called the growth plate or the epiphyseal plate, which is in the metaphysis region of the long bone as we originally described the bone. The growth plate can be visualized by X-ray. So before I describe what we're looking at here, let me first explain what an X-ray is. It works on the same principle as basic light photography. Nowadays, of course, photography is digital. In the old days, the way that it worked is there was a film covered with a chemical emulsion that was reactive to light energy. When light hit that film, a silver-based chemical emulsion changed, and when it was processed through chemical washes, the silver would become a black pigment. And so anywhere that the light hit would turn black. That's a negative image. So in photography, there was a two-step process. The camera contained the film, which made negatives, and then the negatives were used to make positive films, which were just really double negatives as far as this silver emulsion process I just described worked. X-rays work on the same principle, but there's only a one-step process. The X-ray film is exposed to X-ray radiation, which is not the same as light, but still has the same effect. The X-rays cause an emulsion to change, and everywhere that the X-rays hit, it turns black. Everywhere that stays white is somewhere that the X-rays are blocked. Here we have two X-rays side by side. One is of a child's ankle, and the other one's an adult ankle. The left-hand image is of the child's ankle and the right-hand image is of the adult's. The lateral side of either ankle is towards the middle and the medial side is towards the outside, which is actually kind of backwards, but I didn't want them to seem to be the ankles of the same person. Now, we can see the gap in both of them between the tibia and fibula and the talus, which is the ankle bone that makes the joint. Additionally, however, in the child's ankle, we see a seam between the epiphysis and diaphysis of the tibia and between the epiphysis and diaphysis of the fibula. If you look in those same regions in the adult, more so in the tibia than in the fibula, you can see a very thin line which represents where that growth plate was. When the growth plate finally finishes its calcification, there will be an even denser little piece of bone right there, which you can see on an X-ray like this. The reason we see a little gap on the X-ray at the growth plate is because that's cartilage. Now, cartilage is actually a mostly avascular tissue, and in soft tissues, when we can see something, a light gray haze, that's really because of the iron ions in red blood cells that are blocking X-rays. When we don't see anything, that's usually an avascular tissue, and that's what we see in cartilage. Now, what's happening in the cartilage is that there are a few different layers of tissue as it's going through different steps of the process. There's a region where the cartilage is basically resting, called the reserve zone here. And then the cells are dividing rapidly in a region called the proliferative zone. And those proliferated cells will then grow to a more full size in the maturation and hypertrophy zone. And then the chondrocytes will eventually die off and the matrix will begin to calcify to become the bone matrix. On the other side here we see two femurs, one shorter than the other obviously, and the growth plates are highlighted in the growing bone, and the epiphyseal line, which is calcified, is highlighted in the mature long bone. But what happens is just the bone grows longer really from either side, pushing out the epiphyses so that the whole thing becomes a bigger bone. The next growth process to discuss here is called appositional growth. Apposition is similar to the word opposition. Opposition means what's against something, usually ideologically. Pro versus con, liberal versus conservative, etc., etc. Apposition means what's physically against. What's opposed is what's leaning against something, right up next to it. So appositional growth is what's happening at the edge of the bone. Now, truly this type of growth takes place in a few different ways, and it's usually what's happening at the edge of the bone. But what's important about appositional growth is that it's involved in producing bone markings on the surface of bones. And the osteoblasts that are involved in making the additional bone matrix growing out here are often stimulated to grow specifically where something like a tendon is attached to the bone. When a muscle contracts, it pulls on the bone. And at that site, there's a little extra growth making the bone thicker so that the bone can deal with the stress of the muscle pulling on it. And we see things like tuberosities and trochanters and those sorts of things where something was putting stress on the bone. Now, this is a little YouTube video that takes a series of images from another source and makes them into a little movie with a voiceover explaining what's happening. So I think it does a good job of explaining on its own.
Bones grow through the process of appositional growth, the formation of new bone on the surface of older bone or cartilage. Osteoblasts beneath the periosteum lay down bone to form ridges around a blood vessel. The blood vessel lies in a groove between the ridges. The groove is transformed into a tunnel when the bone built on the adjacent ridges meets. The periosteum of the groove becomes the endosteum of the tunnel. Osteoblasts from the endosteum lay down bone to form a new concentric lamella. The production of additional concentric lamellae fills in the tunnel and completes the formation of a new osteon.
Consider this question. When you feel that you've reached an answer, hit the next button to go into the next slide, which will reveal the correct answer.
In appositional growth, when stress is put onto the bone at a particular place, at the periosteum, the osteoblasts are stimulated to lay down more bone matrix, making that part of the bone a little bit thicker and able to handle the additional stress that the muscle puts on it.